Yá'át'ééh, bine. Good morning, my relatives. Hello, it's Mark Charles. I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee. Today is Friday, August 15th. And I want to talk to you about some of the things going on. If you haven't heard, the District of Columbia, the place where I live, DC, is quickly becoming a federal police state. President Trump is attempting to take over our police force and is deploying National Guard throughout the city in a move that is highly illegal and unconstitutional. But he's doing it anyway because, again, the rule of power is you break rules and it demonstrates you're in power. So that's what he's doing. But I want to address some of the not just that specific instance of what's going on, but there's other things going on, right? He's ordered a review of 8 of the Smithsonian museums, including the Museum of African American History and Culture, as well as the National Museum of the American Indian. And he's basically saying we need to take out things that might offend white people and reflect poorly on our myth of our own exceptionalism. And so he's looking at things that he's calling divisive when they merely just are being honest about what our nation has done and how it was founded and what it's participated in. And so I want to begin talking about this today because it's creating a pattern of how we behave. And I've talked about this pattern before, and it's something that is ongoing, but it is a destructive pattern or cycle of dehumanizing nationalistic violence. Currently, it's manifesting itself in ICE raids, which is primarily on immigrants of color, as well as on attacks against people who are unhoused and other people who are on the margins. There's a direct attack on anything regarding diversity, equity, or inclusion. And at the moment, they're well, they're becoming normalized, but they're not as violent as they probably will become in the future if they continue to go unchecked the way they are going unchecked right now. Although I know many people would argue, and rightly so, that much of the things we're doing, especially against undocumented immigrants of color, is incredibly violent, and I will not disagree with that. But anyway, these are the things I want to talk about today. I want to talk about our ongoing dehumanizing cycle of nationalistic violence and what we can do to stop it, as well as what we need to do to possibly begin healing from it as a people and as a nation. So, my relatives, I invite you to grab a cup of your favorite morning beverage. I'm drinking my second cup of coffee, and join me for a dialogue as I explore our nation's history, our politics, issues of faith, and talk about what we need to do and how we can walk in beauty more better together. My relatives, I want to start by begin doing what I always do and acknowledge I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C. My people call it Washington. I moved here over a decade ago with my family from the Navajo Nation. I'm a dual citizen of the United States and the Navajo Nation. And I want to acknowledge that the lands where I'm living now, here in Washington, the District of Columbia area, are the lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the host of the lands where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humbled I am to be moving, breathing, living, existing on these lands today. So my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. I haven't been on my second cup of coffee in a little over a week and a half, and so I know I've missed a few people and I missed some dialogues. So I'm excited that some people are joining. Karen, Yá'át'ééh, Bine, thanks for joining. Hope you have a great morning cup of coffee that you can sit and chat with. For everyone else who's on, thank you for joining me this morning. I was traveling these past few weeks, and we got our daughter, our middle daughter. We have 3 children. Our oldest is graduated high school 6 years ago and is now out of college and working. Our middle daughter is in college, and we got her dropped off at college just this past week, and she's in orientation this week. And I'm very proud. She worked hard throughout high school and applied to some very challenging programs and got accepted into a aerospace engineering program in a college just outside of Boston. And so we brought her up there about a week ago, and she is there in orientation right now, and school will start next week. So yeah, very, very proud of our daughter, very excited for these new steps she's taking, and looking forward to seeing what happens in her growth as she's in college. And our youngest daughter is beginning high school, or not beginning high school, is continuing her high school here, and she's going into her junior year, and very proud of her too. So it's been a busy past couple of weeks with things with family and doing some travel. And now I want to sit down and talk to you about some of the stuff going on. And I actually wrote some stuff out. I don't actually read very frequently or write for my presentations, but I wanted to make sure I kind of went through this step by step, at least to bring us into the conversation. And so I have about a 3 to 5 minute piece that I want to read here, kind of read. You won't see me reading it, but hopefully it'll come across fairly clearly. But I want to go through and just lay out a few things about what's going on. If you remember, and maybe you didn't even see some of these stories, but last week on August 6th and on August 9th, it was the 80th anniversary of us dropping nuclear bombs on the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And it did not get much fanfare, both in the press as well as from our governmental officials. And it wasn't really talked about or even discussed in a more national way. And that is really unfortunate, because we have done some really, really horrible stuff as a nation. And if we don't learn how to talk about it, we're never going to be able to change course or correct what we've done wrong. And so I want to talk about these things today. So let me read what I've written, take about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll get into some of the stuff I want to discuss. On August 6th, and again on August 9th, 1945, the United States of America committed acts of state-sponsored terrorism and genocide with the nuclear bombing of the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, killing 80,000 and 40,000 people, both instantly and respectively. But this was not the first time the United States acted in such a way. Just 3 years earlier, on April 18, 1942, the United States carpet-bombed Tokyo in an operation called Meeting House. This act was even more deadly, killing between 80 and 100,000 people in a single night. But that also was not the first time. In 1890, the U.S. military massacred hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children at Wounded Knee in South Dakota. The U.S. Congress went on to celebrate this massacre by awarding 20 Congressional Medals of Honor to the U.S. soldiers who participated in it. But again, that was not the first time or the first act of state-sponsored terrorism and genocide by the United States. From 1860 to 1865, President Abraham Lincoln worked tirelessly to ethnically cleanse the northern, central, and southern routes of the proposed transcontinental railway. This campaign included atrocities such as the hanging of the Dakota 38, the Bear River Massacre, the Long Walk for the Navajo and Mescalero Apache, and the Sand Creek Massacre in eastern Colorado. Twice during this period, Abraham Lincoln paused and called on the nation to set aside a national day of thanksgiving. He wrote 2 proclamations, literally giving thanks to God for the country's expansion and its acquisition of lands, iron, coal, and other precious metals, the material fruits of the genocide he was actively committing. And on December 6, 1864, just 8 days after the final Sand Creek Massacre, the fourth of his row of atrocities, was completed, Abraham Lincoln declared in his annual address that, quote, the great enterprise of connecting the Atlantic with the Pacific states by railway and telegraph lines has been entered upon with a vigor that gives assurance of success. But again, this was not the first time. In 1830, the United States Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, authorizing the president to remove native nations from our lands east of the Mississippi River to reservations west of it. This resulted in the Trail of Tears for the Cherokee, the Choctaw, and the Chickasaw, and about a dozen other forced relocations. These campaigns of terror were so successful that in 1851, Peter Burnett, the first governor of California, in his State of the State address, declared that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct, must be expected. While we cannot anticipate this result, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power or the wisdom of man to avert. Governor Burnett was not saying that these people are dying from disease and we don't have medicine to treat them, nor was he saying that these people are starving and we don't have enough food to feed them. He is literally saying we cannot stop killing these savages until they are exterminated as we work to complete our manifest destiny. The United States of America was founded on a brutal and heretical doctrine of discovery. It was built on the lie of white supremacy, white male Christian supremacy, and our history of dehumanizing violence is justified with cries of a self-proclaimed manifest destiny. Our acts of state-sponsored violence and terrorism are so blatant, ruthless, and dehumanizing that in Unselling Truths, the book I co-authored with my good friend and co-author Soong-Chan Rah, we wrote, quote, "The most challenging comparison is not that we, the United States of America, the leaders of the modern-day heretical kingdom of Christendom, one supposedly exceptional nation that for centuries has been thriving, growing, and expanding supposedly under God, are not that dissimilar from Nazi Germany." Mr. Charles, you might say, that's a stretch. Don't believe me? In the documentary, The Fog of War, Robert McNamara was reflecting on his role in the dropping of nuclear bombs on Japan. In World War II, he said, General LeMay said, if we lost the war, that we would have all been prosecuted as war criminals. And I think he's right. He, and I'd say I, were behaving as war criminals. We go on to point out in our book Unsettling Truths that one of the challenges the United States of America faces is that we've never lost a war that matters. We've never been disarmed. We've never had a regime change. We've never borne the scorn of the global community. We've never lost a war that matters. Technically, the Korean War is still going on. Yes, we pulled out of Vietnam, we pulled out of Afghanistan, but we didn't lose any lands. We weren't disarmed. We weren't had a regime change. We were embarrassed, but we didn't lose. The United States of America has won virtually every major military conflict we've been involved in. And as the adage goes, the victors write the history. Meaning that the United States of America, actually white landowning men, have had the opportunity to write their own history for 250 plus years. Which is why we don't talk about the things that reflect poorly on our self-proclaimed sense of our own exceptionalism. Exceptionalism is not just about we are better at things than other nations. No, exceptionalism refers to the idea, the heresy, that white men from Europe are God's chosen people. They have a doctrine of discovery, and they're God's, and they've been given promised lands. That's what manifest destiny is all about. And if you've read the book of Deuteronomy and Joshua in the Bible, promised lands for one people is literally God-ordained genocide for another. The myth of exceptionalism says that the United States of America has a unique, a special, and honored relationship with the God of Abraham. And that's what makes us different. And that's what justifies or dehumanizing horrific acts of nationalistic violence and terror. And today, over my second cup of coffee, I want to talk specifically about what we did in Japan, in Hiroshima and in Nagasaki. I want to talk about what we need to do to begin to acknowledge our own actions, so that we and the people we've oppressed and abused and subjugated to our violence, can begin healing from it. So that's the discussion today. That's the conversation I want to have. We'll get to somewhere at the end of this. As you know, I often talk about the necessity of creating common memory. But before we get there, I want to just talk about what we've done. There were a few articles that were released last week wrestling with our history. There was one in the New York Times, I think it was in the magazine. I'm going to share the link here. It's mostly photos. The title of it was 80 Years Ago, Annihilation Came to Japan. It was interesting that the title, which is how they get people to click on it, says Annihilation came to Japan. Not, this is what we did to Japan. The article talks more about what we did to Japan. And the photos show what we did to the Japanese people. But the title, which is what most people will just see, is that this annihilation came to Japan. And I need to warn you, if you read this article and look at it, it is absolutely horrific. And it's a very honest, or at least appropriately disturbing article of the result of us choosing to kill over 100,000 Japanese civilians 80 years ago, and what that experience was like for those people. In the USA Today, there was an article, and this article was titled, Smithsonian Ignores Hiroshima and Nagasaki Bombings on the 80th Anniversary. It's a good article. I invite you to read it. It talks not only about today, and it does talk about today. It talks about the review of the Smithsonian museums that the White House has ordered. It talks about the executive order Trump signed several months ago, claiming that our national monuments and writings need to reflect the notion of American exceptionalism and not be divisive regarding our history, and talk about only our contributions, only the positive things that we've done. But it also goes back into the past. And it looks at other disagreements over how our nation could wrestle nationally with what we did to the Japanese people in these bombings. One of the articles I found, and I'm going to share this with you. This was actually, the other one might have been New York Times. This one is the New York Times Magazine. Sorry. I'm going to share this with you. This was called Beyond the World War II We Know, the Hiroshima pilot who became a symbol of anti-nuclear protest. And this article talks about a pilot or a service member named Claude Eatherly, who was on one of the reconnaissance flights that was checking the weather before the bombing raid commenced, or as he was ahead of the planes. And how he wrestled both destructively at first and then very proactively and positively with what he had been involved in. And I want to just read some of the descriptions that they gave in this article. It said, the atomic bomb was the most ferociously deadly weapon ever created by human ingenuity. A technology that multiplied the power of these few men and planes to a degree out of all comprehensible scale. In Hiroshima alone, some 70,000 people were killed instantly. A horrific deed fit for gods or monsters. But overhead in their plane, the airmen were normal men in human bodies, no more able than anyone else to fully comprehend or bear responsibility for the mission they had been chosen to execute. Another article that talked about this. This talks about the same article. It said the B-29 bomber banked hard to avoid the blast. The explosion lit the plane's interior with a brilliant flash, so bright that some of the aviators momentarily thought they had been blinded. More than one noted a strange metallic taste in his mouth. A loud clap broke around them as the first of 3 shockwaves hit, causing the plane's aluminum body to violently vibrate. Looking down, they saw a fireball unfurling. The American airmen who flew the mission to drop the atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, were witnessing a man-made cataclysm unlike anything seen in the previous history of human warfare. They watched as fire swallowed the whole city. It was like no ordinary fire, a crew member later recalled. It contained dozens of colors, all of them blindingly bright. Just when it appeared that the explosion was subsiding, a kind of mushroom spurted out of the top and traveled up to what some say was a distance of 60 or 70,000 feet. I think it's very adequate, appropriate, that the author of that article said that these pilots, these men, these soldiers, were deploying a weapon out of all comprehensible scale. A horrific deed fit for gods or monsters. That's what killing 70,000 people in an instant should feel like. It should feel absolutely, overwhelmingly horrible. Even Hitler wasn't that bad. I was reading an article and looking on I was doing some searching on an article about how many people were dying at a time during the Holocaust. And there was this article by the LA Times. I'm going to share this in the chat. It said at the peak of the Holocaust, Hitler and the Nazi regime murdered more than 14,000 Jewish people a day. We did 70,000 in a single instant. 40,000 3 days later. 100,000 in a single night just 3 years earlier. Unfathomable violence that we as a nation have not grappled with. We haven't grappled with it. One of the articles that I read was by the Atomic Heritage Foundation, talking about the controversy surrounding the Enola Gay exhibit. And it just talks about how there was so much resistance to even knowing how do we honor this part of acknowledge this part of our nation's history. And when the Smithsonian and the museums wanted to put up an exhibit, they wanted to include both sides of the story. Our building of this weapon and the impact it had on the Japanese people. And the controversy between the two sides over how to be honest about this versus how to not make our soldiers feel overwhelmingly horrible about themselves resulted in it never being displayed, it never being shown. Because our nation doesn't know how to grapple with it. We don't know how to think about it. Even if you look at the Truman Library, I'm going to share this article with you. In the Truman Library, it talks about this history, the decision to drop the atomic bomb. In this article, it said after President Roosevelt died on April 12, 1945, it became Harry Truman's job to decide how to end the war. The thought of invading Japan gave Truman and his advisors pause. The war had shown that the Japanese were fighting for the emperor, who convinced them that it was better to die than surrender. Women and children had been taught how to kill with basic weapons. Japanese kamikaze pilots could turn planes into guided missiles. The cost of invasion they knew would be high. Several things about this quote I want to point out to you. First of all, they said the war had shown that the Japanese were fighting for the emperor, who convinced them that it was better to die than to surrender. Let us not forget, as was shown by Daniel Amirwar in this book, How to Hide an Empire, that the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor was not the most successful or even violent of all the bombings that happened to U.S. military installations that day. The reason Pearl Harbor became the rallying cry is because that's where the most white people were affected. Don't believe me? Read How to Hide an Empire by Daniel Amirwar. He lays it out beautifully. That's why it became the rallying cry. They had to make white people feel like their liberty was threatened. And we all know the famous quote by Patrick Henry in 1775, who said, "Give me liberty or give me death." So it's not unique that the Japanese people were fighting for an emperor who convinced them it was better to die than surrender. We've been saying that mantra for our entire history as a nation. Second, this quote at the Truman Library says women and children had been taught how to kill with basic weapons. Now, why does it say that? It says that because we needed to justify how we weren't just killing soldiers. We were intentionally and indiscriminately massacring civilians. And so we had to say that these weren't civilians. These women and children were actually threats to us as a nation. We've never wrestled with this. We've never wrestled as a nation with what we've done, with our history. And every time it rears its head, as is happening now with President Trump and the Republican Party initiating violence against immigrants of color, violence against impoverished and unhoused people, violence against their political enemies. As they are breaking more and more laws and ignoring the Constitution of this country, which is a flawed document in and of itself, but that's a discussion for a whole nother day. People act like, what are we doing? What's happening? This is not who we are. We're the United States of America. We're a great people. We're exceptional. We're the good guys. I was like, no, we're not. This is what we do over and over and over and over and over again. This is what we do. This is who we are as a nation. We are a violent, Christian, nationalistic, abusive country that justifies unthinkable violence against people who we name our enemies. which allows us to ruthlessly kill them with no remorse, regret, or shame. And then we just rewrite the history. Because we keep winning our wars, we just rewrite the history. And we take these exhibits out of our museums, we block the publishing of these types of stories, we revise the history of what we've done, and we create this mythology of who we are as a nation. What Trump is doing is nothing new. This is what we do. The question isn't how do we stop Trump? You're asking the wrong question, Democrats. This is not about how do we stop Donald Trump. This is about how do we as a nation learn how to grapple with what we've done and what we've become. And as I've said time and time again, the Democrats are just as opposed to that conversation as the Republicans. American exceptionalism is a bipartisan value. Christian nationalism is a bipartisan value. It was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who last used the doctrine of discovery as a legal precedent for land titles in a case back in 2005. President Biden was every bit the white Christian nationalism that Donald Trump is. To this day, slavery has never been abolished in our country. It is 100% perfectly legal under the jurisdiction of our criminal justice system. We never abolished slavery. We never ended it. We just redefined and codified it. And because we haven't grappled with our history, we haven't acknowledged it, we haven't owned it, we have this abusive cycle that just goes on and on and on and on and on, rearing its ugly head again and again and again and again and again. And this is what we need to stop. This is what we need. Instead of screaming at Trump, why don't we actually edit our Constitution? I've said this before, I'll say it again, right? Trump is doing a lot of things against what people think our Constitution does say or should say. But if you look at the original intent and purpose of the Constitution, the reason it was written, the Constitution was not written to give justice to people of color or to women, to African Americans or Native Americans. That's not the purpose of the Constitution. We, the people who said that, the room they were in, it was white landowning men in that room. The purpose of the Constitution is to protect white landowning men. That's the reason we have a Constitution. There's not a single female pronoun in the entire document. It is specifically excludes natives, specifically excludes women. Counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. We've never abolished slavery. The purpose of the document is to protect white men. And Donald Trump's found that loophole. Our Constitution is incapable of holding people like Donald Trump accountable. So instead of screaming about Donald Trump, why don't we fix our foundations? Again, I've said this before too. If your house is on a bad foundation, you're going to have cracks in your walls and gaps in your windowsills and a creaky floor, and you can recarpet your floor, you can paint your walls, you can plaster your windows as much as you want, but until you fix the foundation, you are not going to stabilize and fix your house. It's not going to happen. So we need to fix our foundation. That's what we should be protesting. That's what we should be discussing. The majority of our Supreme Court justices are originalists who interpret the Constitution with the desire to get back to the original intent with which it was written. We have to fix our Constitution. And second, the second thing we have to do is we have to learn how to talk about our history. I use this quote all the time. I'm doing a tour around the country based on this quote. The quote that says where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build a community, you must start by creating a common memory. There's no point in U.S. history that we can look back on and say we had healthy community across racial lines, our gender lines. Remember back when we had healthy community across racial lines? That point does not exist. There is no point in our history where we had healthy community across racial or gender lines. It has not existed before. This is why the notion of racial reconciliation is a misnomer. We are not trying to restore a previous harmony. We need racial conciliation. We need a Truth and Conciliation Commission. We have to build these healthy relationships for the very first time, and we cannot do that unless we begin to build a common memory. And white people are terrified of their history. They're terrified of it, which is why Trump is blatantly trying to hide it and bury it, calling it divisive, saying it challenges the notion of our own perceived exceptionalism. And that's wrong, he says. It's only going to make our nation more violent, more destructive, and poorer citizens in a global community. It's only going to disconnect us further. So we have to push back. Not by protesting Trump. He loves the attention. He doesn't care if you're kissing his butt or protesting him, as long as you're making him the focal point of your life. That's what he craves. No, we have to talk about our history, who we are, what we've done. We have to acknowledge the atrocities we're standing on. We have to be honest about how we got to where we are. We have to correct our foundations, create a common memory, build a healthier community, and allow that to be our strength. The reason people listen to us, the reason the United States of America is feared, is because we demonstrated that we are even more willing than Hitler to indiscriminately and violently kill civilians on a massive scale. That's why we're feared. Because we've proven, demonstrated how destructive we are willing to be. Our violence knows no boundaries. We've proven that. But that is not how you build a healthy community. That is not how you have proper relationships. That is not the way you live in peace. But our nation is now so terrified that what we've done to other nations is going to happen to us that we just ramp it up. It's very unhealthy. And it's going to end up hurting us and the globe in the long run. It is hurting us and the globe in the long run. So my relatives, thank you for joining me for a cup of coffee. My second cup of coffee. Thank you for allowing me to share with you some thoughts about what we need to do to change the direction our nation is moving in. Trump's a problem. I don't disagree with that, but he's not the root of the problem. He is just the most recent manifestation of our problem. And just voting him out of office or getting a Democratic majority into power in the next midterm elections, that's not going to solve our problems. Not in the long term. We need to do foundational level work, my relatives. And we need to create common memory. Anyway, I hope this is helpful for all of you, my relatives. I appreciate you taking some time to join me. If you want to learn more about my Common Memory Tour, I'm going to share a link with my GoFundMe right now. Because of Donald Trump's direct attack on anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, my speaking invitations have plummeted. So many institutions, colleges, universities, organizations, even churches are very hesitant, are unwilling to initiate events talking about the systemic nature of our nation's racism, sexism, and white supremacy. And so my invitations have plummeted in the past few months. I've been doing this tour, and I did 2 events in the last month and a half. I was in Seattle and I was in Chattanooga. Both events were well attended. Both events went longer than I anticipated. My speaking alone lasts for 2 hours and 15 to 20 minutes probably. And at the end of that, a majority of the people stayed for 90 minutes of Q&A. 90 minutes of questions and conversation about these things. What that tells me is, yes, Trump is working very good and being very effective at getting institutions to shut down these types of dialogues. But our citizens, our nation, our people want to have these conversations. And they're willing to stay to both learn about the history and have discussion about it, even though it's challenging and at times very unpleasant. And the way I'm getting these initiated is by doing the fundraising I'm doing on GoFundMe and using that money as seed money to cover some of my travel and to cover some of my honorariums. It's making me have to have less of an emphasis when I reach out to people and say, hey, I'm interested in hosting an event in your location. Are you willing to host me? Even if you can't pay me or you don't want to put money into this, if you're willing to host me, I can fundraise some other resources to help cover expenses and help me put food on the table for my family. So if you would like to learn about my tour, like to support it, help me continue to travel and speak and create common memory around the country, go to my GoFundMe page and read about what I'm doing. I'm actually going to be updating it over the weekend. I'm hoping I have at least 1, if not 2 presentations I want to get up there that I did in the last week in the Pacific Northwest. You also can subscribe to me on Patreon. Once a month on Patreon, I have my Ask Questions discussion where it's almost an ask me anything, and you can jump online. It's a Zoom call. We usually have between 10 or 15 people there, and it's just a chance to ask questions. It's part of my Ask Question tier. And you can just join for 1 month. Just join for a month. That tier is $10, and you can join that conversation and join that Q&A and ask a question or be a part of the discussion that we're having. I also have my Join the Conversation tier, where I'm actually going through a series now, training people of how I think through and prepare my presentations and my speeches, and prepare to talk to a bipartisan audience and challenge things at a foundational level. And how do I talk with communities of color and white people, and all the different things that I do as I prepare to bring my talks to a more national audience. And then I have other tiers on there. I welcome you to go on my Patreon and learn more about it. The last thing you can do to support my work and to help engage in this type of content is to buy a copy of my book, Unsettling Truths, the book I co-authored with Soong-Chan Rah. It's available online. You can get signed copies from my website. You can also buy a pack of 10 books from my website, signed books. And if you use it for a book study or a class or a Sunday school class or a book study that you're doing, I will join you. I'll give you a 45-minute virtual Q&A. At some point over the next year. You can schedule it with me, and we can jump on a call and do a virtual Q&A with your group, and answer questions directly about your reading and about the things you're looking at in that book. My relatives, these are all the things I'm working on. I am so grateful for each of you joining me today for this cup of coffee. I hope your cup is as good as mine. Let me look back through the comments here and see who's online with me. Oh, my dad's online. Yá'át'ééh, Dad. Good to see you. Thanks for joining me. Steve, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining me. Cooper, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining me this morning. Billy, Yá'át'ééh. Debbie, Yá'át'ééh, thank you to all of you for joining this morning. I'm so grateful for everyone who jumped on and joined me for my second cup of coffee. I hope you all have a beautiful day, my relatives. There's some difficult things we need to learn how to talk about, but if we do it well, we can begin to change the trajectory of where we're going as a nation. If we begin protesting the right things and not getting distracted by the wrong things, we can actually change the trajectory of where we're going in the long term as a nation. My relatives, walk in beauty, and may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Yá'át'ééh and hakon.